Let's pay a visit to Mark's True Crime Corner.
This is not a good neighborhood. I'm scared.
Now, here's your host, Mark Thompson.
And a welcome, my better half, Courtney, who loves the world of true crime. What do you have for us today, Courtney?
Well, I heard about a documentary on TikTok, and I was so curious because this woman talked about it being her favorite documentary ever. So I went to watch it. It's on Max, and it's the murders at Starved Rock. And these murders took place in 1960. This is Starved Rock. Do you know why it's called Starved Rock, Mark?
No, I don't.
It's a state park in Illinois, and it's called Starved Rock because in the 18th century, two Native American tribes were had some sort of conflict or fighting, and one of the tribes starved to death on the rock. So the very creation of this rock, starts with real tragedy. And these three women went to take a vacation and go hiking and go bird watching. And they were murdered in March of 1960 at the state park. So the three women are Frances Murphy, if you're watching on the left, Mildred Lindquist in the middle, and then Lillian Oding on the right. The women arrived to Starved Rock on Monday, March 14th, 1960. They took their suitcases to their room at the lodge at Starved Rock, and they had lunch at the lodge, and then they decided to go take a walk. And as I mentioned before, their intention had been to go bird watching. So they leave the lodge. A couple of people remember seeing them at the lodge in and around and after lunch, but then they're not seen again. So this is photographs that the women took of one another while they were on their walk. They walked toward St. Louis Canyon within Starved Rock. Starved Rock is a really massive place. And you can see these photos. These are all taken as they're going on their walk. This is a really interesting photo because it's a double exposure. So if you're watching, you can see at the forefront of the photo is Mildred. And then behind her, it's Frances Murphy. Oh, yeah. And then there's actually another Mildred behind her.
Oh, yeah.
Why this is interesting is because for a little bit of time, they actually thought that the second Mildred was a man following them, but they realized, and the camera that was used to take these photos was one of the murder weapons. Yes. So the women go hiking, and then nobody hears from them. But nobody's really looking for them per se until one of the husbands of the women's calls the lodge later on Monday night and asks about his wife, because it would be uncharacteristic of her not to call him and confirm that she had arrived safely. I think if you go to the next visual, Tony, of the husbands. Yep. So on the right-hand side, you'll see the three husbands. I believe the man that called was Robert Murphy. So he calls again on Tuesday, March 15th, and he says, "My wife, something is wrong. She has not called me. I do not know where she is." They go and check. And if you go to the next visual, they find the women's car outside the lodge, and there's snow on the top of it. So they know that the women haven't driven anywhere. And they go to the rooms, and the luggage is still packed, and nothing has been disturbed in the room.
Wow.
So they know these women have not been here. So they send out a search party. And the search party leaves, and they find the women deceased the next day, March 16th of 1960. So here you'll see what I was talking about earlier. You can see the lodge if you're watching on the right-hand side, and then you can see an arrow where the bodies were found in St. Louis Canyon. Now, that's a really far walk. You can tell from the map, it's a long way for these women to be hiking. And from what I understand, it was fairly rugged and difficult to hike this path, especially women in their 50s. And unexperienced hikers. So there is a theory that the women got a ride, and the ride took them to the west entrance. So if you're watching on the left-hand side, you can see the west entrance of the park. And then it's a fairly easy walk right into St. Louis Canyon. Last night we were out with friends, and the wife of the couple had been to this St. Louis Canyon and had photographs underneath this waterfall that I'm about to show you in this area.
But she wasn't a suspect because it happened a long time ago.
She's not a suspect.
No.
But more the point I was making is this is a beloved area of, as I know it, there's probably people listening and watching who are from Illinois who have been to Starved Rock. this is a really beautiful part of the state, and yet this awful thing had happened here. So there is this theory that they got a ride there. Now, this is where the bodies were found. Thank you, Tony. So if we watch this video, you'll see this is the waterfall that our friend was under. This is a waterfall where a lot of people travel to. This is the waterfall. And then here, this is the cave where the bodies were found. Now, it's important to note how far up that cave is from down here. And this is where the bodies were found. So the 3 women, I'm not going to go into too much of graphic detail. They were beaten to death outside of the cave, and their bodies were pulled up into the cave and then placed like they were doing snow angels. Now, the faces of the women were, you could not identify the women because of the amount of damage and harm that had happened to the faces. And the faces are very vascular. So whoever did this would have had blood all over them. The murder weapons were found because somebody stepped on a branch and they saw that the branch had blood on it. And so it was determined that the murder weapons were a branch, the camera, and some binoculars that the women were carrying. All women were tied with cord, and then they had their undergarments pulled down, but there was no sexual assault. But they were very much placed in a way that represented that the intention was that they would be found in these poses.
Wow.
So you can see the state police again investigating this crime. If you go down, thank you, Tony. This is the men bringing up the bodies. I think this is important because as we talk a little bit more about this case, because the case happened in 1960, there were different determining factors as to whether or not you would prosecute a suspect and how someone might confess to a murder, what that process was. And now a lot of attorneys, and even some of the attorneys that were involved in the case back in 1960, have said that the confession and the process of eliminating suspects would not have been able to hold water now. They would not have prosecuted the suspects now with what happened.
They did have suspects though.
Yes, they have suspects. So if you go down, yeah, these are 3 of the men who were these are 2 of the men who were investigating it. Ray Utsi is the tall gentleman with the hat and the glasses. He's a sheriff. And then the man sitting is Deputy William Dummett. Now, Ray Utsi was apparently a really great guy who people admired, but William Dummett was not a good guy. He was a bad cop. He perjured himself on the stand around this case, and he was the one who took the main suspect and threatened his life multiple times until that suspect confessed to the crime. And he basically wrote out what that confession would be and had the suspect sign it and confess to the crime.
So this is like the worst of what you hear confessions that are extracted from people.
Yeah,
is that this is the worst of it.
Yeah, if you go
you basically berate someone until they sign the.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what happened was they these are the murder weapons, by the way. So on the right hand side, if you're watching, is the
piece
log.
Of wood. Is that what is that?
Yeah, it's a log that was used to beat the women with, and then on the left-hand side is the camera case and the binoculars that were also used to beat the women. What's interesting is that the film was still salvageable from the camera, and the camera was really delicate. So it didn't seem like the camera was a viable option for a murder weapon. It would seem that this was premeditated, and that in fact the killer or killers brought a weapon with them and beat the women with that. And maybe this sort of ancillary things were used in the heat of the crime. But they started out with interviewing the owner of the lodge. His name is Nicholas Spiros, and then his son, who's George Spiros. And then they interviewed all of the employees of the lodge. So you'll see Nicholas here on the left-hand side, shorter gentleman with the cardigan, and then his son, Nicholas. Nicholas had some intellect issues, was a little bit of arrested development. So a lot of fingers were pointing toward George, but Nicholas was the owner of the lodge. He was one of the most respected men in the county because he brought in so much revenue. I mean, the amount of financial impact that Starved Rock had for the county was really important. So he was definitely someone of sort of elevated stature. But that didn't go anywhere. They interviewed all the employees, and they made one of the employees do 6 lie detector tests. And that is, in fact, Chester Weger, who eventually gets arrested for this crime. They had 6 lie detector tests within the first 6 weeks of this crime, and then nothing really happened. And then at month 8, they took Chester Weger to Chicago and had a 7th lie detector test with him, which they said he failed. They also accused him of another crime, and get this, if you go down, they put him up in a lineup for this man to identify him for a crime that happened in 1959 that included a robbery and a rape. They were trying to establish a history of violent crimes, but he didn't do that crime. Now look at this lineup. Most of these men are old, and this gentleman in the middle, this man in the middle is very tall. I mean, in a lineup, you would often use people who have similar physical features, similar age, and when they did this lineup, Deputy Dummett came over and put his hand on Chester Weger as if to mention and show to the man, this is the person who you need to identify. So all of this is being set up to help with background, to help validate what they're going to do, which is arrest Chester Weger for this crime. And so they, in fact, arrest him, and he goes to trial. This is a photograph. I thought this was so interesting. It's so, to me, 1960s of him getting out of this cop car and like lighting a cigarette. But this is him during the trial. He's young. He's 21 when all of this happens. And he goes to trial.
Champagne says he passed 6 and failed 1. What?
Yeah. And it's alleged he failed 1. Apparently on the car ride back from Chicago is where Dummett, the Deputy Dummett, threatened his life multiple times and said, if you do not confess to this crime, you will go to the electric chair. Now, this was an election year, and there was a lot riding on finding the murderer, the person who perpetrated this crime, because there was so much of there was so much income tied toward and to Starved Rock for the county. It was very important that they take away any concern or lack of tourism that was happening from this crime, which was now getting national attention.
Glad my name isn't Dummett, says Luke Spark. Yeah, it is a troubling name.
I know.
Yeah.
This is where they have him reenact the crime. He confesses. His confession doesn't make sense. There's a lot in the confession that doesn't make sense. He says that he wanted to rob the women. He tried to rob them. Now, he's like 5'7" or 5'8", and I think he was 120 pounds when this happened. There is no way that he could have held 3 women, attacked them, dragged their bodies up into that cave, which is why I was showing you the elevation of the cave. There's just no way. And then go back to work and complete his day as a dishwasher at Starved Rock Lodge. It just all seems implausible. But this is, in fact, what was architected by Dummett in the confession. So when they go, and I'll get into this, but when they go and search the kitchen, they actually find twine that matches the ties that were made on the women's wrists to hold them down. So they found that where? Yeah, they found that similar tie in his kitchen. Yeah. Okay. To what was used for the women's wrists. Exactly.
Similar or it's tough. Back then, they didn't have a way to really match it.
Well, here, if you go down, sorry, Tony, you'll see a visual. There are 20 components to the tie. So there's 20 strings that comprise this cord. If you go down one more, it should be there. And the cord with 20 ties in it is the cord that was in the kitchen.
I see.
So that's how they determined it. There were 2 types of cords that were used to, disable the women. One had 20 strings, as you see here, and one had 10. But they could not find where the 10 came from. They even went to Chester Weger's house, and there was no cord with 10 ties. And you can see the different ligatures or the different ties here detailed on the right-hand side if you're watching, according to the 3 women. So Chester Weger he's found guilty. He goes to jail. He is in jail for 60 years, and he never shows remorse. He never admits to the crime. He completely recants his confession when he is assigned a public defender because he says he did not perpetrate this crime. And he goes up for parole 23 times before they finally grant him parole in the year of 2020. And the year that they grant him parole is the year that the prosecutor who put him in jail died. So it was the first year that prosecutor was not present for the parole hearing. Yeah. But throughout the 60 years that he was in jail, he still says that he is innocent. And there are a lot of details to this crime that would point toward multiple suspects and that just Chester would not have been able to execute this crime by himself. And that he certainly didn't have the propensity or potential to have had, such a heinous crime.
Well, what was the motive? Did they ever decide?
And that's the thing. It's like the motive was not robbery because the women still had all their jewelry, still had their wedding rings, still had all of their possessions. So there wasn't really a motive, and that's a great question, that they could tie back to Chester. Now, Chester's released from prison. There is a really interesting podcast that was created by his current attorney. He's right here. And he has Andy Hale is his name, and he has some really interesting conversations with Chester. He, of course, very much believes in Chester's innocence. And what happened in the year of 2022, which you might remember as we've discussed in some recent crimes, is the genealogy and genetic testing of DNA. And so one of the victims, Frances Murphy, she had a glove. And on that glove were 8 hairs, 8 blonde hairs, and some of them had follicle material. So they had been pulled from the scalp. And they tested those hairs, and then identified that a set of 3 brothers, one of those brothers had that hair, and it was not Chester Weger. And if you go down, so you can see Frances Murphy on the left-hand side. She had the hair on her glove. And if you go all the way down, you'll see that this man, his name is, I need to see it. He was one of 3 brothers in the area, and it is his hair that is found. Thank you, Edward Simon Bray. It is his hair that is found on the glove of Frances Murphy.
He is the one who did it, so Edward Simon Bray.
Yes, he is at least one of the suspects that was there. Now,
he died March 16th,
he
1960.
Died the day the women were found, which means he killed them the day before. And the only reason that they believe that he is the one brother of the 3 is because the other brothers were born at the end of the 19th century, making them almost 80 years old when the crime happened. So or 70 or 80 when the crime happened. So it would not have been those brothers. They believe very much that Edward Simon Bray is the man whose hair was on that glove.
Well, it seems indisputable given the fact that the hair was on the glove. But I have to ask what his motive might have been. Did they ever
That's the thing, is
figure it
I
somehow?
don't think anybody has found a motive except for
you kill 3 women, and that's just
kill 3 brutally, beat them.
Brutally.
Yes.
It's
and not sexually assault them and not take any of their valuables. It's so bizarre. And the idea that he died the same day that the women were found, 2 days after this crime was perpetrated, is absolutely crazy. And it's awful because a man spent 60 years in prison who may be innocent and absolutely one of the people that perpetrated the crime died the same day that the women were found, and no justice was ever served. Yeah. If you go all the way down, it'll show you some photographs of the podcast and the documentary, should anybody be interested in learning more about this case. It's still ongoing. So Andy Hale has the podcast, The True Crime, and then The Murders at Starved Rock is the Max documentary.
What a yarn.
I
Pretty
know.
incredible. And a man wrongfully accused. They extracted a confession from him.
He is
And in the end, he had to do 60 years, so you said?
60 years. It is the longest time served by a potentially innocent, an innocent man. Yeah.
Wow.
They have declined. He is on parole, but he's still charged with the crime despite the DNA evidence. It's great. I don't know if he knew Edward Bray. I don't know how it all is involved. This is still ongoing, so there's still information that's being given to the public through the podcast with Andy Hale here.
How did the man die? The guy.
Great question. He died of a heart attack, of heart failure.
Heart
as I know.
attack.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I know it's a crazy story. It really is unbelievable, and it's sad for everybody involved. It's sad for the families that lost the women. It is sad for Chester Weger's family.
Sure.
It is absolutely sad. The
Mark
man that
says war makes some people insane. People from World War I came back. We
Yeah.
don't know what demons they were holding inside them. So yeah, he might have been,
true.
that kind of thing. Sure.
and the man that created the documentary, he is the son of the prosecutor who put Chester Weger in jail.
That is unreal.
It's unreal.
Wow.
And you can feel the conflict throughout the interviews he has with his father, because his father prosecuted this case when he was like 24, 25. I mean, it absolutely made his career and defined him as a leading prosecutor in the area of LaSalle, Illinois. And yet his son made this now widely recognized documentary, which calls into question his entire legacy around this case.
Wow.
It is fascinating.
I want to see the documentary.
And it's well done. So, yeah.
Courtney, very well done.
Thank you.
His dad screwed that guy over. Exactly, Champagne.
His dad starts his first interview on the documentary is like, well, I never see you unless you want something. So I guess it's just good that I'm seeing you for this documentary. I mean, it starts with
dad
his
sounds
dad
like a day at the beach.
putting him in his place. Yeah. So, but his dad even says, as I mentioned before, there were serious issues with the confession. And if this case was being tried now, that confession would not be admissible.
Right. It was a different time.
This predates a law that was put in place that the prosecution of a case has to provide exculpatory evidence that they find to the defense. This predates that. So they did not have to give that evidence to the defense of Chester Weger.
Audrey says, in relation to the picture of the women with the skirts in the snow.
Oh, I know,
Skirts,
yeah.
even in all that snow. My mom didn't wear pants until after she was 50. My
Yeah.
grandmother never wore pants.
That's a
Look
really
at
interesting.
skirts
I didn't
in
even
the
notice
snow.
that. Yeah.
Gosh, women have had to put up with more crap. You guys are
know.
really, Anyway,
I know. I did not notice that. That's really interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, they had been planning the trip for weeks. They were very excited. So it's all just very unfortunate.
Fascinating story and very well told.
Thank you. I tried to do it quickly.
You did a very nice job. And the documentary sounds super intriguing.
Yeah, it's great. It's well done.
All right.
Well, thank you for having me.
We'll see you at the fall show in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Courtney, everybody. And that is True Crime Corner for today.
True Crime Corner, only on the Mark Thompson Show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.